Leadership Lessons.
Dr. Gray, it is my privilege and honor to be with you and your guest and our fellow Kentucky Baptists.
Barry is no stranger to Kentucky Baptist, but let me tell you a few things about him. He serves as pastor of Glendale Baptist Church at Cave Mill in Bowling Green, and was as well as a part-time church replanting consultant for the Kentucky Baptist Convention. Barry is president of this year's Pastors Conference, which will be held in Paducah on November the 11th, right before the KBC annual meeting. Barry has his own preaching and teaching ministry called All Things New. His experience with replanting includes Crossroads Tell City in Indiana, a KBC-sponsored effort with Hawesville Baptist Church, and Glendale Baptist Church. He holds an MDiv and THM from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and is currently pursuing his PhD in homiletics and church history at Southern. Barry's church also hosts a Legacy Christian Academy, which is a school that has about 250 students in it. And so Barry has plenty of things going on. He and Jenna have been married 1 year. So Barry, let's jump right into these questions. Tell us how you came to faith in Christ and then how you heard and answered a call to ministry.
Dr. Gray, I grew up in a unique context at Glendale Baptist Church. It is my home church. Richard Oldham was here for 57 years, and under his ministry, about 250 men and women were called out through various decades. I remember as a young boy coming under conviction of sin and knowing that judgment was there and praying to receive Christ, and then going through a series of doubts about salvation and whether I'd prayed the right way or asked for enough forgiveness or those sort of things. And one day I knelt in my pastor's office and he said, "Barry, would you pray to the Lord that you are trusting in him, heaven or hell, sink or swim?" And I did, and the Lord just gave me such a release from that and a relief, and was baptized by my pastor along with my brother on the same night, and was called into ministry about the age of 13. I've been preaching ever since.
Wow, what a great story, and what a great ministry that Brother Richard had, 57 years, and don't want it to slip by that you said 250 men and women answered a call of some sort during his ministry. And then Barry, you've kept something going, kind of a fraternity of those ministers called the Swordsmen. Could you tell us, take a second and talk about that?
Yeah, so that's taken where the sword of the Spirit is able to rightly divide the word of truth. It's the word of God. Our pastor was always teaching us the word, and so he coined that term for those who had been called out into vocational ministry. They're across the country and around the world. It's gotten to the point where some of them have retired and gone on to be with the Lord, but there's still quite a few left serving, and it's really his legacy. He did not have an earthly family, but he's got a family of God, of people who really, he was a father in the ministry too, including me.
What an incredible legacy, and then what an appropriate name for a Christian academy right there on your campus is Legacy Christian Academy of Bowling Green. So Barry, tell us about Glendale Baptist Church. How long have you been there, and then it itself being a replant?
So I grew up at Glendale. That's the church I've known my whole life. The people knew me there. Was called back literally the week that COVID hit in March of 2020. And Dr. Gray, I think you remember having that conversation with me saying, "Barry, I believe it may be the Lord's will for you to go back to Glendale." And I told you I would never do it. And the Lord has a sense of humor, and here we are. But growing up there, having a chance to essentially reset the ministries because of COVID shutting down for a couple of months, which allowed us to kind of reintroduce ourselves to the community, continue what was working, discontinue what was not, and find our place and welcome new people to help us along the way. And so Glendale was my church, my school, my family. I was ordained there, baptized there, saved there, called to preach there. My pastor came as to my dad in Green Valley Trailer Park as a 12-year-old boy, helped lead him to the Lord, gave him a Schofield Reference Bible, changed our trajectory forever.
Isn't that something? And Barry, it just seemed to make sense that you'd be a great fit for Glendale, but they no criticism of anybody or anything, but they had gotten pretty low in attendance when you came. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was about 30 or so active members, and then we had some bus kids too. Traditionally, the church had run several hundred bus kids. At one point, we had 10 bus routes going all over the city. That had declined, and we just essentially had a faithful core that was left, that was willing to follow the leadership of the pastor under the Lord. And slowly but surely, it hasn't been magnetic or sudden growth, but it has been steady. We've expanded over the years, and the Lord has allowed us to reset and continue in that process even today, about 4.5 years later.
Folks should follow Glendale at Cave Mill. I'm trying to look up the right name. Glendale Baptist at Cave Mill on Facebook, and just kind of watch week by week by week some of the exciting things. I've been able to do that over the last 4.5 years. Have preached in the church, and the atmosphere is continuing to just be strengthened. It feels like, and the church is growing as well. So, Barry, as we mentioned, you are the president of this year's Pastors Conference. You chose the theme, and for folks that don't know what a Pastors Conference is, tell us what it is, and you chose the theme Recount, and so tell us why that name.
So the Pastors Conference every year is sponsored by our convention. It's for pastors and ministry leaders, but it's also for lay people, and it tends to be just a time of encouragement for pastors. And there's an irony with the Recount theme, simply because it follows the election for this year. And I'm not trying to wade into any of that controversy at all, but I thought, wouldn't it be unique to take our focus off of whatever the election results are, and let's recount the goodness of the Lord. My pastor used to use Psalm 27 whenever he'd make hospital visits. I think discipleship is more caught than taught. He took me and a bunch of other guys with him all the time, and he would go to Psalm 27, and he would come to those last two verses in the King James where it says, I had fainted unless I had looked upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And I thought, how blissfully ironic that as we speak to people in the land of the dying, we are helping them look forward to the land of the living. Just to remind pastors, wherever you are, whatever the status of your ministry or your church or your family, there are better days coming in the Lord, and we can know that and we can rest in that. So I'm excited about our Pastors Conference this year. I think it'll be a blessing to everyone who comes.
Barry, thank you for leading in the Recount Pastors Conference. Ministry is a privilege, not a right. Those of us who've answered a call to ministry leadership, we know that. It's a joy and a genuine honor to get to serve the Lord in the capacity that you're in. I say the same about my work. And yet it's not without its frustrations, and ministry leadership can feel overwhelming. So tell us about ways that you have been able to remind yourself when ministry is challenging, to just, what's helped you stay faithful to the Lord?
Dr. Gray, I think one of the most challenging things in ministry is we are constantly using metrics as to our success or failure. It's hard to measure things in ministry. You know, when I go out and mow my lawn, which I need to do more often, once that grass is cut, I can measure the effectiveness of what I've done. Yeah. It's hard to measure when souls are maturing in the faith, when they're serving the Lord. You plant that seed. You know, Paul says, I watered and somebody else planted, but God is the one who gives the increase. And so if I'm constantly measuring my success rate by how many people are in the church on Sunday, how much is in the offering plate, how many buildings we have, I'm going to ride that constant emotional wave of highs and lows. But if I spend time grounding myself in the Lord and in His Word through devotion, reminding myself of who God is and who He has called me to be, to stay faithful, I think that's a recipe that'll help us avoid burnout and the temptation to look towards other people. Because either I'm looking to someone else and saying, man, I wish I was doing that, or I'm looking the opposite way and saying, I'm not doing that, when I need to keep my eyes focused not on people, but on the Lord who died on behalf of those people.
So comparison never works. You either you compare in despair, or you compare and end up with pride, as you say. Find someone who's maybe not, you don't think is doing quite as well. Barry, how do you balance that mindset of not determining your value or the value of your ministry based on the numbers this year compared to last year compared to last year? How do you do that while at the same time, we read the Bible and the gospel bears fruit, that we're sowing the seed, folks get saved, and the Lord's adding daily to the church those who are being saved. How do you kind of keep those two important things in balance? I mean, we want to see churches grow. We want to see every church be a thriving
Absolutely.
church, and yet we don't want to attach our value to it. So any wisdom you've learned there?
I think to make sure that I'm leaving results in the hands of the Lord, but I'm also being obedient to what He's called me to do. Yeah. So I'm actively witnessing, I'm actively discipling, I'm actively giving, I'm actively a devotional life. And so I believe God calls our people to be active, to serve Christ for the will of God. It's not a passive work. This is the will of God for your life, your sanctification. It's not as if we sit around and wait for what God told us to do. He's told us what to do. And so we're going to be actively about it, while at the same time, not measuring everything by our efforts, but by things that we can't even see. It's his kingdom. It's not always visible, but he says it'll have no end.
That's excellent. I think I heard our friend Paul Chitwood when he left KBC with the IMB in a meeting somewhere. He was kind of learning to talk about measuring faithfulness versus fruitfulness. And I think that's good and helpful language. And I think I'm hearing you say some of those things. So faithfulness includes, am I consistently sharing the gospel? Do I have a plan for discipling men and women discipling women in the church? Are we starting new ministries that can impact the community? Are those some things that you look at as a pastor and leader, and some things that you try to find some way to measure the faithfulness of the church while trusting the Lord with the fruitfulness?
Absolutely. I think we measure the commitment of each individual member. Are they actively in a Bible group? Are they actively in worship? Are they actively giving? Are they actively sharing? You mentioned men's and women's ministry. I don't know that there's anything more effective as far as a spiritual return of investment than a pastor investing in the men in his church. We have an Iron Sharpener men's ministry. Not all of our men are in it, but a lot of our guys are. We're going through right now it's Kent Hughes' Disciplines of a Godly Man.
Yeah,
we go
excellent.
through about a chapter or two a month.
Yep.
This is an incredible book. And we just get together for fellowship. We've broken off in groups of 4 or 5 and have a few leaders. And that has helped our men bond somewhat. But I believe if you can disciple the men, you will get a return of the whole family. We also have women's ministry. My wife, Jenna, assists a lot in that because our women are so faithful in serving and in everything else. But those are some of the metrics that we're looking for. Do we have an active process to minister to the men, to minister to the women? Are we offering something for marriage? We've gone through Grace Marriage this year as a church, and that's been a blessing. So being obedient, while also reminding us that it's not ultimately our work, it's his work.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's a good mindset. So, Barry, you're hoping one of the things that will come from this pastors' conference is that pastors will be encouraged. And I want to talk in just a moment about the speakers that you have lined up. But, I could ask this straightforward question. Have you had challenges in ministry?
No, Dr. Gray, my ministry has been all roses and sunshine.
So I know the answer before asking. I know the answer before asking it. Is there a particular challenging time that you would want to reference, even without any details? And then what I'm looking for on the other side of that is, how did God use that to shape you, or that the Lord taught you some things through challenges? Any response to any of that?
I would just say towards the end of my ministry at Hallsville and Tell City, which the Lord greatly blessed through a lot of people. We had a pastor staff deacon conflict, not to disparage any of the parties involved. But I tell you what I learned out of that is, Dr. Gray, I had so many people call and reach out. You were one of them. Dr. Chitwood was one of them. Faithful pastors in ministry. And I would just tell you, that meant the absolute world to me. And to have other people who are in the trenches with you, whether you're right or you're wrong, they're just saying, hey, I'm with you, I love you, I'm there to support you. I think that makes all the difference in the world. I think that's the value of cooperation. There's no lone rangers in the kingdom of God. Yeah. There's nobody meant to be on an island. We're to be there with one another. And so what I would say is, number one, do what you do for the Lord and not for people. Love people, but don't do it for people. And number two, have some friends in the ministry, because you're going to need them one day.
Yeah, that's true. And the guy that tries to go solo, you can just kind of watch that ministry. Hopefully in time he'll figure out, I need some close friends to talk to. And Barry, when we have conflict in ministry, we're usually both right and wrong. There's usually some things we handled well and some things that we didn't handle well, and that's just true for all of us in any ministry setting. Well, let's talk about the speaker lineup. So who's coming to preach at the Recount Pastors Conference, and why did you choose some of these men in particular?
Well, this year we're excited to have 5 men who are coming for the Pastors Conference, and also I guess it would be a quartet or a quintet of men who are coming to lead the music
Okay.
as well. As far as the preachers, we have Scott Long. Scott played for the University of Louisville football team, well-known guys, one of the campus pastors for Highview Baptist Church, doing an incredible job on discipleship. I'm tremendously excited to have him. Lance Parrott from my hometown in Bowling Green, working with planting and replanting at Christ Fellowship Church. A great story. Lance is a true brother, kingdom-minded. We have John Wesley Fowler, who many of our Kentucky Baptists will remember as the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Mayfield, also former Kentucky Baptist Convention president, now executive director treasurer of the Missouri Baptist Convention. Wes will be back with us. I'm thankful to have him. We have Michael York. I've known Michael and his family for 25 to 30 years. Michael pastors in Ashland. He and his wife Sarah have been through an ordeal this year with her cancer and going through treatments. And I've asked Michael to share some of that. I believe he's going to bring a tremendous word from the Lord. And then one of our swordsmen out of our home church who's just recently transitioned into retirement from pastoral ministry, and that's Mike Rout, who most recently served at Redemption Hill Church in Colorado Springs, has also served here in Kentucky at Eastern Gate and also at Rose Hill in Ashland and at Fountain Run to start out his ministry. I believe Michael bring an incredible word.
So, Barry, all these guys have Kentucky connections, and I love that. I think Kentucky's a unique state. So if you could snap your fingers and every person leaving the pastors' conference would leave with this, what would it be? What do you want them to go home with?
I want them to be encouraged, to be reminded that the Lord has us here, that the strength of our ministry, as my mentor, Herschel York, often says, the strength of our ministry depends on the strength of our calling. And if God has called us, he will be faithful, whether we reach thousands of people like Peter did on the day of Pentecost, or we preach for 40 years like Jeremiah and we can't see the results, but we've still got the fire in our bones, because faithful is he who called us, who will do it. So I hope they'll be encouraged in that.
So 2 Corinthians 4, verse 2, or 1 Corinthians 4, verse 2, says, moreover, it's required of stewards that a man be found faithful. If you had to define faithfulness in ministry, and you've already touched on, I think, several aspects of it, how would you put faithfulness in ministry in a nutshell? What do you hope to be true of your own when you reach the end of your road in Christian ministry? What do you hope to have been true? I know you want to be faithful. What would that have looked like?
My hope is to pray that, as one pastor said years ago, you want to have the hide of a rhinoceros, but you also want to have the tender heart of a child. I pray that through everything that comes in ministry, the mountains and the valleys, through the successes and the disappointments, I pray that God will help me to be tenderhearted and not be cynical because I'm afraid of being hurt or burned or offended or anything else. My pastor said that R.G. Lee used to pray at the end of his life every night. He told him this because he was friends with him. He would say, I pray every night, God, help me not to be a bitter old man. Yeah. Help me to have the joy of the Lord. That's what I want. I want to be faithful to my calling. I want to be faithful to my wife, and then faithful to the church that God has me at.
So, Barry, you didn't get married just to help you in ministry, but there are benefits to your ministry of being married. I'm assuming you're experiencing some of that. How is your marriage to Jenna 1 year in? How are you finding that relationship even helping you to stay faithful in your calling?
Well, I tell you, Dr. Gray, Jenna Curtis is an incredible blessing. Jenna Curtis Fields is an incredible blessing to my life. She has as much joy as anyone I know. Just reminded me of the joy of the Lord, even through the setbacks that she's had. You know, her dad was a pastor for almost 40 years and passed away a number of years ago. She was incredibly close to him. She has an autoimmune disease that's prevented her from being able to go overseas full time, and yet she's studying missiology and working on her PhD in applied theology at Southeastern, working as the missions mobilization coordinator for our association. We've got 70 different languages spoken in Warren County Public School System, trying to reach all those groups. She has encouraged me in ways that I needed to be encouraged as someone who cares about my well-being, who cares about, before me as a pastor, me as a person. Mm-hmm. Having said that, she does have an understanding of ministry that I think is incredible and goes beyond what a pastor's wife does, whether that's the kids ministry in our church or the youth ministry or the women's ministry or whatever else. Jenna has some tremendous gifts that she's using for the Lord, and I'm thankful to be along for the ride.
I knew Jenna's dad. He was one of my favorite people in the state. Wasn't super close with him, but loved him. And he's the church, one of the top baptizing churches in Kentucky
Yeah.
that he served for all those
Nice.
years. I remember preaching for him one Sunday, and I met Jenna for the first time. I thought, that's an impressive young lady right there. She was a go-getter at that time, and to see you two together is such an encouragement. Barry, let's talk about replanting. And so you're currently serving in a part-time capacity as a replanting consultant for us here at KBC. So explain what we mean by replanting, because that church planting language, replanting, that's language that we use that makes sense kind of inside the ballpark language. I'm not sure folks even understand what a church plant is, much less a replant. How would you help us with those terms?
When we talk about church planting, we're talking about churches planting churches, but churches also replanting churches. So a church plant would be a new work started by a church in an area where there's a need, forming a core group, forming a congregation that way. A replant is more than what we would describe as a church maybe in need of revitalization or revival. It's a church that's perhaps on the other side of its life cycle and really needs some help along the way of another congregation or association to come alongside to celebrate what the Lord has done there, and in some cases to close down and to reopen under a new name and a new ministry with the resources that God has given us. Dr. Gray, I think this is a crucial area, not only for Kentucky Baptist, but for many churches. If we read that the statistics are right, that many churches are closing every single day, a lot of those properties end up being turned over to apartment complexes or what have you, when they could be used for the kingdom of God. And so this is a sensitive subject. Nobody likes to talk about declining or considering other options beyond going on as it is. But if you'll think about it in a kingdom mindset, you may reach more people through replanting your congregation than you ever would have otherwise. You just have to be kingdom minded about it.
Barry, I remember a church over in Henderson, and the name is escaping me right now. It may come to me, but they went to Zion Baptist and told that church, they said, we believe that our location was right, we believe the vision was right, we just don't believe that we are any longer the people who can carry out this vision at this location. And they gave the property over to Zion Baptist in Henderson, and Zion replanted a campus there that's become a church. And that's an incredible act of grace and generosity for a church to reach that place. You've actually led in two replants. You led in the replant of the church with Hawesville over across the river, now Crossroads, and then you've led Glendale as a replant. What are some things just off the top of your mind that you've learned about replanting? Any aspect of it, either the initial conversation with a church that's in serious decline, or the actual steps or work itself?
I would say two things. One, to a church that is in need of help and maybe realizing that having the humility to be willing to have a conversation to say we're in need of help. That isn't defeat. That's victory for you if you're willing to say that. To a church that's looking to replant, having a conversation with that church and developing relationships with the key leaders in that church. Dr. Gray, I often use the phrase, what you need to have is what I would refer to as a man of peace, somebody inside that congregation who has a heart to say there could be a brighter or a new day for this church. In the example that you gave for Tell City, for us and the staff at that time, it was a man by the name of Harold Smith. He was Command Sergeant Major, the United States military, serving as interim pastor, had served 3 tours in Korea, 2 in Vietnam, and God just gave him a heart to be able to build a relationship with our staff, to have services over there for them for a year, and to eventually work a relationship where we were able to celebrate that ministry, close it down, reopen, and God took us from 12 to, by the time I left, we had about 200 there on our last Sunday. And it was a work that would not have been possible apart from the man of peace. Here at Glendale, one of the bridges between me and the pastor search committee was someone that many Kentucky Baptists will know by the name of Don Mathis. And Brother Don was serving as the transitional pastor here and continued to bring both parties together, even though we were having a family conversation. I was very frank with them. They were very frank with me. I'd known every member of that pastor search committee since I was in diapers. And so having that person, I believe, Dr. Gray, is just crucial. And you can't always dictate when exactly that will happen. All you can say is, hey, we love you, we care about you, we'd love to help your church if there's a way that the Lord would allow it.
Yeah, that seems so important because this is such a relational work. I mean, handled the wrong way, the declining church is they're going to be hurt and they're going to be angry if someone comes at them in the wrong way. But that person who cares about them and is close to them can begin to start saying, hey, look, think about your options. Is it best to call a new pastor at this point if they're without a pastor? Is it best to try some revitalization things, or is it best to release your property to maybe a church plant in the area or another congregation? There's nothing wrong with having those conversations, and there's certainly nothing wrong with the church reaching the place to say we believe the best path forward is to give this property to another church or to replant.
I believe it is one of the most selfless things you can possibly do in ministry, and one of the most effective things for the furtherance of the kingdom.
So, Barry, replanting is different than church planting and a new work. Once you have that man of peace, and once the folks is like, okay, we're going to do it. Name change, close for a while if we need to, different approaches to ministry. What else have you learned?
I think in doing that, get everybody on the same page. Typically, if there's a church coming alongside to partner with you, or an association coming alongside to partner with you, which has been the KBC's criteria when we assess replanters, to have that core group where they come together, where there has been a leadership change, somebody that we know God has called to lead this now united congregation. I think that's crucial. And then to do outreach, to reintroduce yourselves to the community, and then you start implying there's still the plant in replant. Mm-hmm. It's just this is when you have the opportunity to do it. Except this time you've got some resources to back you that you didn't have before.
Barry, one thing that all of these church models have in common, whether it's a new start, which we're calling church planting, or a restart, which we're calling replanting, or revitalization, every one of them have in common we have to reach people. We have to reach some new people that we're not currently reaching. How have you in the Crossroads Church in Tell City and then now at Glendale, how have those two churches reached people that they weren't previously reaching?
In any way we can in both communities. We've done the canvassing, we've done the door knocking, but we've also encouraged people just to build relationships with their neighbors, to build relationships with their co-workers, with people at the restaurants. All the things that need to happen to say, Lord, just open my eyes that I may see. Give me an opportunity to reach someone with the gospel today. And Dr. Gray, you model evangelism as well as anyone I know. The Lord always answers that prayer.
Yeah. Yeah, if our heart is to share the gospel, the Lord will give us opportunities. Barry, anything else you want to add about replanting? Anything that if a pastor's at a place where he thinks, I think the church that I'm currently pastoring needs to replant, how could he reach out to you? Or if a church is without a pastor and they think maybe this is for them, how could they reach out to you or someone else and get started?
They can absolutely reach out to me or our state convention. They can reach out to their local association and form a partnership with the state convention. The important thing is that they just follow through and reach out with humility. I think of Dr. Gray, the vision that Paul received and really that John Winthrop had implanted on the Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter Seal when he preached a model of Christian charity aboard the Arbella in 1630 and brought the Puritans aboard. Those words, come over and help us.
Yeah.
That's what we have to think about. There are others who are willing to come over and help if we just ask. And that's why cooperation is always better than competition.
Yeah, so that's who we are. That's what separates us from other Baptist groups. We do believe in working together, and this is a great chance for me to plug the cooperative program. And so since 1928, Kentucky Baptist Church, since 1925, Kentucky Baptist churches have been giving through the cooperative program. We're coming up on our 100th year anniversary. And Barry, there's always lots to celebrate with CP. Your church contributes generously to that work, but we're funding 3,500 missionaries in 155 countries who last year through their national partners saw more than 102,000 baptisms. We've worked together to plant more than 11,000 churches in North America since 2010, but not everyone's aware of this. Sunrise Children's Services has seen their 687th adoption since 2009. Now, they're not in the adoption business, they're in the foster business, but they know the best thing for a child is to find a permanent home. And then right now, Kentucky Baptists are supporting disaster relief work all over the South. We've had folks in Valdosta, Georgia. They've served out more than 50,000 hot meals to disaster relief. We have a group over in Brevard, North Carolina, about 80 workers. Barry, we did a training this weekend in Corbin that there were about 21 people signed up. And I think the day before the training, it jumped to over 100 people. By the time the training started, they were about 150. It's one of the largest trainings we've had. And it's just Kentucky Baptists wanting to respond and help out to people in need. And that's just who we are. So thank you for leading in that. Thank you for leading Glendale to be a partner in as a cooperating church.
I've heard somebody say, Dr. Gray, that if we were to start from scratch, it would take us 100 years to build the apparatus that we have through the cooperative program right now. Nothing is ever perfect in life, but the cooperative program is one of the best things that we have, and we would do well to see it properly funded in the future.
Last question. Tell us, Barry, either a person or an experience that has helped shape you as a leader.
I mentioned my pastor earlier, Brother Richard, but today is actually the 85th birthday of another one of my mentors in ministry. His name was Gordon McDowell. He was the director of missions for a long time at the Lynn Baptist Association. Dr. Gray, you were at his celebration of life service. I remember you being there. Gordon was a country, rural pastor who became an AMS, but just had a gift for discerning the Lord and people. And I got to have breakfast with him for an entire semester and just spent time with him through the years. He'd call me every Sunday, he said, to make sure I was out of bed. But just to have a relationship with somebody, salt of the earth, who truly loved the Lord. You know, I think a lot of our guys today, they want to have right theology and sound doctrine, and obviously that is important. I would never disparage that. Yep. But give me somebody who loves the Lord and who loves people and who loves his word, and I think that's how we're going to reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. So I'd mention Gordon McDowell on what would have been his 85th birthday.
Thank you for bringing him up, and I know his family values the relationship. You were part of his funeral service there. Barry, every Christian leader needs someone who's 20, 30, 40 years further down the road than they are, who becomes a pace setter for us, especially if it's someone we can be up close to like you were with Gordon, to have breakfast with him. Brother, thank you for your ministry. Thank you for just being a friend and for your work in Kentucky. And thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Dr. Gray, it's my honor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Leadership Lessons. An audio podcast of this program is available on both Apple and Android devices. The Kentucky Baptist Convention was created by churches, for churches, to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. For more information about the KBC and the cooperative program, which fuels our ministry, go to kybaptist.org. We'll see you next time on Leadership Lessons.